So maybe you, while we wait a couple more minutes for more people, you could write on the chat where you are tonight. I'm always interested in seeing where you're coming from.
Why don't you write on the chat, she says.
Oh, Prince George. Okay, lots of folks here in Vancouver. We have Victoria. Rebecca's in Victoria. Alejandra is in Prince George. Yeah, Brianne is at UBC. Kata and I are here in South Vancouver, just near downtown Vancouver. 6:03. I believe we're going to see more people coming in just because we had close to 30 registrations, but you know, sometimes people just register and don't show up. So I'm going to respect everybody's time. Oh, Pit Medals, Margarita. Alejandra's dog, right, has a sweater.
Yes, she has a they have a Christmas sweater.
Lovely. Ana Lorena is joining us, and she's on the east side of Vancouver. Ana Lorena, welcome.
Thank you so much.
Good to see you, or not see you. I don't know.
No.
Okay, I was just about, because it's 6:04 now, I just want to, I was making a little time for people to join us, but I think we are ready to get started. So, buenas noches, boa noite, good evening, everyone. My name is Lili Vieira de Carvalho. I'm the Executive Director of VLACC, the Vancouver Latin American Cultural Center. Before we begin, I would like to acknowledge that we are hosting this event from the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh peoples. Kata, can you keep an eye on the door? Thanks.
Yes.
Thank you. I want to encourage all of you to read and understand the history of this land and the people who have taken care of it for thousands of years, and what it means for you to be here. There is this fascinating resource that I have been following. It's and I'm going to share on the chat. Is a website called Beyond 94. Let me just get this link for you. Okay, this one is correct. So this is it's from CBC, and they are keeping track of, they are monitoring the progress of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission's 94 calls to action. And so all the calls to action are there with the current status of each one. So it's a good one to keep an eye on. VLACC is a nonprofit organization. I'm getting a call. I'm just going to check if somebody trying to come in. Just a second, sorry. Hello? Sorry about that. VLACC is a nonprofit organization with the mandate of sharing a deeper understanding of Latin American arts and cultures. Our goal is to establish the first cultural center for Latin American arts in Canada, right here in Vancouver. If you still don't know about our organization, please visit our website. I will add the link to the chat. We have added your email to our newsletter when you register for this event, and you are going to receive news about our programming a couple of times a month. So future reading groups and other events will come to your inbox. I would like to also acknowledge the support of the University of British Columbia Latin American Studies Department for this series. Other programming funders are the City of Vancouver, BC Arts Council, Canadian Heritage, and Metro Vancouver. Now I'd like to pass on to Catalina Cata Parra, the coordinator of this series. Cata will be introducing tonight's presenter, Brianne Orr-Álvarez. Thank you.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for being here. So tonight's format will be simple. Brianne will kick off the conversation and we'll open up the floor to questions and comments from all of you. Feel free to unmute your microphone and raise your hand, real or virtual, whenever you have something to say, something to add, something to discuss. I'll be moderating the conversation to give you all a chance to speak. Just so you know, this event is being recorded. We like to keep these recordings in our archives and will be shared on VLACC's YouTube channel. So feel free to keep your camera off if you are camera shy. No problem with that. So I'm very excited to introduce you to Professor Brianne Orr-Álvarez. Brianne is an assistant professor of teaching in the Spanish department, and she's taught in various capacities at UBC since 2010 and at the universities in the United States, in several universities in the United States prior to coming to Canada. Brianne's role in the French, Hispanic, and Italian Studies Department focuses on undergraduate student engagement and intellectual growth in and outside the classroom. She teaches across the undergraduate Spanish language curriculum and coordinates beginners of Spanish 1 and 2, which positions her to work directly with the students during their first year at UBC. She sees them through the Spanish major and minor programs. Brianne also teaches literature and culture classes in Spanish and in English that grapple with different aspects of the Hispanic context, with a particular focus on Latin American resistance literature. Beyond her work in the French, Hispanic, and Italian Studies Department, Brianne has also taught in the Arts 1 program, a theme-based predisciplinary writing intensive program for first-year students, and she's faculty fellow for Jumpstart, UBC's orientation program for incoming first-year students. So this is so exciting, Brianne. You're bringing all your expertise and your experiences to this virtual classroom. We're really pleased to have you. And so welcome to our program, and I'll pass the microphone to you. So the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. It's nice to see you all again. I recognize some of you. It's wonderful to see that there's a group that keeps coming back. And today I did prepare some slides. It's going to appear that I'm organized, but I'm not meaning to dictate the direction of the conversation or anything. In fact, today I chose 2 stories that I'm not too familiar with because I was curious about them. I'd read them in the past, but didn't really recall the details, kind of like Margarito Duarte when his old roommate runs into him in the street. We'll talk about that. I was like, why didn't I remember this story? It's so wonderful. But I will share my screen with some slides just so that we can talk a little bit about the author and other details that might help us guide the discussion. So these 2 stories are written by Gabriel García Márquez. I just made it so that I can't see all of you at the same time, but how many of you have familiarity with this author already? Good, I see a lot of show of hands. So there are some things that are predictable in Garcia Marquez, which is good. It can help us understand him, but he's one of my favorite authors, and I will always choose to discuss him over others for whatever reason. I always find myself drawn to him. And so today, just so we have a little bit of background on these stories in particular, they come from a book called Strange, well, in English, it's called Strange Pilgrims, and it's published in the early 1990s. But in Spanish, it's actually just called 12 Cuentos Peregrinos, which for those of you who aren't familiar with Spanish, just means 12 pilgrim tales. So I found it very interesting as someone reading these stories in translation. The first time I read them was in English, or excuse me, in Spanish, that the adjective strange now appears in the title. Does anyone have any idea, and maybe we can get into this as we move on, but why strange? What is strange about these two pilgrims in particular that we talk about? Does anyone want to share any thoughts? The pauses on Zoom are very long, but I'm not uncomfortable because I'm also teaching online and I'm used to these like 10 seconds appears to feel like 2 minutes, but
Well, I just can guess.
thank you. Yeah.
I don't know the real translation why, but I was thinking is because all the tales of that book are strange, but is Garcia Marquez's style, so all but he is strange, you know, so I really don't know that.
Thank you. Yes, Rebecca.
I wonder if the English translators were trying to break with like the connotations of pilgrim in English, such as the Mayflower, you know, and maybe like the Canterbury Tales or something. Like we have a lot of, that word has a lot of baggage. So maybe they wanted to kind of add something to it to break that idea.
I really like that idea, particularly because the type of pilgrimage or pilgrim that we're seeing in these stories do not really relate to these. They are exploratory, sometimes imposed, other times not. But I like that idea that they're trying to break from the stereotype of what we might think. And in a Hispanic context, as we'll talk about, the pilgrim and the pilgrimage in general is a very special human and a very special process. And so I think the idea that they maintain pilgrim is important. But this book is actually comprised of 12 different stories, many of which have female protagonists. So the main characters are women. And it's interesting because if we do think back to, as you're saying, Rebecca, to those main exploratory journeys, we do, and you know, tend to see the pilgrims, the male pilgrims dressed and going about their ways. And the women are dressed in a very certain way too, and they have very specific roles, right? Which are not necessarily the dominant ones in society. They're confined to different spaces, different roles. And so I think Garcia Marquez captures this as one of the tropes that he speaks through. And another interesting thing about this book in particular is that Garcia Marquez wrote the stories not at the same time, but during a period of about 2 decades. So the stories in theory were not written as part of this book, but then he later packaged them as such when he realized that there were some loose connections among them. So I thought that was really interesting because he's a very calculated writer, but these seem to be some characters that may have slipped through the cracks of previous short story anthologies, and they made the cut for this one. So one thing that we'll talk about and that will most likely come up is that, as Rebecca and Ana were saying earlier, or maybe Ana more than Rebecca, that Garcia Marquez is someone who likes to talk about the strange, right? He likes to talk about that which is ordinary, that which is recognizable to us, but also that which is beyond our imagination. But at the same time, there's a little bit of reality to it. And I really like this about Garcia Marquez, and I think that he captures it really well in these stories. And another type of experience that these stories capture that not all of Garcia Marquez's works do is the idea of movement across borders, across nations. He's someone who likes to situate his works in the Colombian Caribbean, but these stories are crossing country borders, nation borders. They're very different types of stories. And Garcia Marquez himself did live in exile. He lived in different countries during his intellectual upbringing, France and things like that, Barcelona even. So he has had these experiences too that expose him to different types of people. And then another focus or focal point of this book and of all the stories in the book are the familial relationships, the relationships of families, and how the role of the female protagonist comes out in this family unit in different ways. So this is just to give you a little bit of a background of the story, but I'd like to bring us back to the point that Rebecca was taking us toward, Pilgrims, right? So I have a question for you all. What is a pilgrim in your mind? Margarita.
Yeah, in my mind, I understand that a pilgrim is a character or a person that has the mission to go into something that he needs to do, he wants to do.
Mm-hmm.
He needs to go into that quest, into that really is a trouble.
Yeah.
He need to follow a specific path that for that person is important to arrive to what they consider their goal.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Margarita. So a type of quest, as Linda's also confirming in the chat, sometimes it's a personal quest or goal or mission. Sometimes it's a spiritual one. Sometimes it's a religious one, but it is a journey. It is a process of self-discovery that happens as you're also exploring the geography of the land and most likely making a lot of sacrifices, particularly when it comes to your comfort, right? So it is a quest of this nature. And a couple of, some of the main international pilgrimages, right? We see in Jerusalem, for example, or to Rome to see the Pope, as we see in one of these stories, or even through Spain. Is anyone familiar with the Camino de Santiago? Yes, exactly, Santiago de Compostela. There's a beautiful movie that came out not too long ago, but yeah, The Way, exactly. The Way it's a beautiful movie about the Camino de Santiago and the journey that a father takes to bear the burden of a journey that his son could not complete in Spain. And it's a wonderful movie. It was just on, it's on Netflix. That's wonderful.
Oh, great.
It's so good. I really enjoyed it. And I thought of this, and maybe this is one of the reasons why I chose one of these stories, because I had recently watched that movie. But the two stories for today are about two people that make different journeys for different reasons, and sometimes with the help of others, and sometimes with the hindrance enforced upon them by others. So we will see how we bring these stories together. So I'd like to do things a little bit differently today. I have some questions that I've put up here, but instead of just displaying the questions, I will maybe copy them in the chat and remind us of some as we come along. But if you guys have some questions, you can use those too, but I would like us to see each other as we discuss them. Some of the more general questions that I came up with the saint are really general, like what stood out to you? What was interesting to you? What confused you? What made you think further about this topic? The roles of characters, narrators, the historical backdrop, because this is important in Garcia Marquez always. and these stories are not an exception. So I will copy and paste these questions in the chat, but also if you have questions, please bring them up. Just because in previous discussions with you all, I've wanted to see your faces and I couldn't when we're discussing. So if that's okay with you all, here are some of the questions, but feel free to jump in with anything. What caught your attention to the saint? Did anyone have any interests in particular with this story? Protagonist. Margarita, yes.
Sorry. To me, this story showed how Gabriel García Márquez uses magical realism, yeah, in a masterful way. Really, he really make us believe that Margarito Duarte, the main character, is taking this quest because his saint really deserve to be canonized. So we truly believe that his daughter, even though she died when she was 7, or it's been dead for 11 years, but her skin is intact, and the flowers in her hair, etc. And he carries her in a shallow case. So it may seem so strange, weird, bizarre for saying something, the whole situation, but because he's a master in what he does, he truly make us truly believe that this is happening. So that's why we could have empathy, you know, through, I mean, in the quest that he's taking. That kind of caught my attention.
Thank you. Yeah, so you're already pointing us in the direction of Linda's question. I don't know if there's a second part to Linda's question. Is Margarito the actual saint, as the story suggests, right? We do empathize with Margarito, who's the one bearing the burden of his daughter throughout the entire story. And you wonder why he just doesn't give up. You know, what's wrong with you that you keep doing this, you know? And we'll talk a little bit about the critique there of Garcia Marquez, but thank you for kicking us off, Margarita. It's true, we're faced with, not only has he lost his daughter, but he's lost his wife, and his daughter has died of a curable illness, because where is Margarito from? Where does Margarito live?
In Tolima. He lives in an area of the Andes of Colombia, so remote area. There probably
Very
wasn't access
remote,
for health
right? So
care.
she dies of a fever, and most likely a curable fever. And in the meantime, in Rome, the Pope is suffering from a case of the hiccups, which is kind of, you know, as you said, Margarita, it's Garcia Marquez's way of bringing to light, you know, the extraordinary with the, yeah, it could happen to us. We could get a case of the hiccups, but we're not going to get every doctor around the world thinking about our hiccups, when in the meantime, an innocent child is dying of a simple fever in the Colombian Andes, right? So immediately Garcia Marquez is showing us the juxtaposition of being privileged and being powerful, and literally being someone that isn't even recalled by a man who lived with him for over a decade in the same space, right? His roommate. So there's a lot of that in the story that kind of does make us empathize with him. And then Linda's question, does the protagonist in the first story qualify as a saint? So does Margarito, or the saint, should the saint be a saint? Should Margarito be a saint? What do you all think about this? This is an excellent question. Lily.
Yeah, I have some thoughts going on, because I was thinking that he could qualify as a saint just because he goes through bureaucracy. So it's like it's, you know, all of us who have to go through all the hopes to get somewhere. And there is this, but it's also, I think that there are so many saint stories that are based on stubbornness. You know, like saints are usually stubborn. And I think there is this single focus of no matter what, I'm gonna go and do this. And so if I have to go through because there are all these moments that he couldn't see me today because of the hiccups or whatever, but I think that there is a little bit of that. I was thinking the stubbornness and this focus that goes through whatever challenges are thrown at you. Yeah, I think that's that.
Yeah, thank you. So it's true. Yeah, and the point comes up in the chat, Ana and Vitor, you know, the idea that there's a huge critique of several critiques, layered critiques of the Catholic Church here, right? Because, the pilgrimage, particularly in Hispanic culture, is associated to a spiritual journey. But this particular pilgrimage to Rome to see the Pope, someone who's going to listen to me, someone who's going to get things done. And then he's waiting by the phone. And then, one Pope dies, another Pope is murdered. We don't know what happens, right? There's it seems uncanny, but it actually happened. So that's the part where reality sets in and you think like, okay, well, some of these things did actually happen, but because he blends them with this, extraordinary circumstance, it's hard to believe, right?
I was also thinking how, because we're talking about the extraordinary circumstances, but it's been many years at this point, and he is carrying the body around like a pet. And this that is supposed to be a miracle becomes a casual thing, that he opens the coffin at the table of a bar, or wherever he goes, he offers to open to show the body, and the body's in the corner while people are talking. And so there is this absurd thing of something that it's totally extraordinary becoming like common and just accepted.
Yeah. Anyone else have any questions or comments? Margarita?
I think like most of the Gabriel García Márquez works has the tendency, excuse me, has his political tendency. The whole world knew that he was, let's say, quotation mark, a lefty or whatever. So all his work reflects, the difference between the choices that poor people or peasants receive compared with this immense conglomerate or whatever you're going to call it to the Vatican. So that's why he goes criticizing really every pope, but he had a special mention for John Paul III, John Paul III, because it seems like that pope has a more, he feels closer to people, that they are more poor or oppressed or not educated. And so I just wrote this because I thought it was so important. When John 23rd said to him, he encouraged him to continue his quest, and he said, God will reward your perseverance. So I think really it was a conscientious, choice for Gabriel García Márquez to show John Paul XXIII like the kind of pope he was.
Yeah, thank you. That's an excellent point.
So I think hello.
Yeah.
Regarding the saint story, one thing that I thought was fascinating was the whole subplot about the I believe it was the group of people that did, movie making and script writing. And I think there was something very meta about that, because with the Gabriel García Márquez is always playing this line between the credible and the incredible, and playing with us, because some of the characters don't really see incredible things as being incredible. They treat it as being just normal things. And this whole story where they present this incredible story to this famous person is like, oh, it's not good because no one will believe it. But the story itself that Gabriel García Márquez was about that. So I think he's kind of reflecting how can you write a story about such an incredible thing and still be interesting, and how believable it is.
Yeah, I mean, there's, just to follow up quickly on that, I mean, there's that point with the bohemians, going around and sharing ideas, and the intellectuals, right? And Margarito doesn't fit because he is self-taught. He hasn't gone to school. He doesn't have the training, right? But man, does he know how to tell a story. But the thing that, the fact that the director says, but if Margarito were able to resuscitate his daughter, then, and I was talking to my daughter this morning, I was like telling her this story, and I was like, what does this remind you of? And she's like, I've already told Lily this. She's like, Coco? And I'm like, yeah, kind of Coco, the movie Coco. And then I was like, does it remind you of Jesus at all? She's just like,
Oh yeah.
oh yeah, like, and I said, and do you believe that story? And she's like, well, yeah. And I said, why? And she said, because it's true. And I was like, really? It was fascinating, but these are things that, this is a big subtext. He's bringing all of these questions. Why do we have faith in certain things and not others? Why do we believe certain stories and not others, And so that's an important point. Sorry, Rebecca, please.
I was just going to say in response to Vitor that it seems like that the author was giving a little joke with the reader, like, ha ha ha, I'm telling you a story that you shouldn't believe because no one would believe it. Yeah, so that was cool. And actually what you just said, Brianne, reminded me of something that a writing teacher told me once, is that if you're going to put a magic raven that talks in your story, you also have to put a magic deer. Like, you can't just put one magical element because it won't be believable. You have to like take it to the next level, sort of like resuscitating the dead girl would be more believable because you've gone over the limit of, I don't know, into some other magical realm.
That's really interesting. And if you think about how this story is organized and the way that it's set up as a tragedy in a way, right? I mean, it has a very tragic beginning, and you empathize immediately with this poor man, and his whole village is behind him, and they're giving him the money to go and do this, and you're like, yes, and then you start reading on, and I went through all the emotions. I think I was angry at some point, this poor man, nobody listens to him. And there's another short story in Spanish. It was from Spain, 19th century Spain, when Spain was lagging behind a bit, but France was moving on up in the world. And it's called Please Return Tomorrow. And it's about a man who in French is named Monsieur San, I don't speak French, so pardon me, like Mr. Without Delay, and so he's going and he's trying to do all of his things, and every single place he goes, they're like, come back tomorrow, so-and-so's on lunch break, come back tomorrow, this is it. And he thinks he's going to Spain for 2 weeks to finish all of these things, and he ends up staying for months and months and months and years. So Garcia Marquez is picking up on this tradition of criticizing modernism. The more bureaucracy we create, the worse it is, the harder it is to get things done. And he does so with his bits of magic throughout the story, as Rebecca said. Linda has a question. Is Gabriel Garcia Marquez a feminist? What do you all think? I know he loves his wife, or loved. Unfortunately, he's not around anymore. Mercedes, his wife, is in everything. He adored her. And the female characters in his story, a lot of times tend to be powerful ones. One of the other stories we talked about in this reading group before, 2 words. You know, it's another case of a girl without an education who makes a living selling words for a living. So she teaches herself to make a living. And so he does tend to sympathize not only with women, but the diversity of the country and the people that are truly trying to make a living and teaching themselves how to do it at the same time. He has a lot of characters of this nature. So
I would say that he was probably as a feminist as possible for a Latin American guy in you know, writing in the 70s and because he I think that he had this overall concern about you know, a social concern, and so I think that was directed at everybody, but I don't think that, and so like women come together with everybody else who needs attention, and I don't think that he could be called a feminist in the way we think about feminism now, and especially because of the context of his life. He would probably be a full-on feminist if he was born like maybe 20 years later.
yeah. And he was, I mean, you know, the interesting thing about Gabriel García Márquez is that he does belong to a group of authors, 20th century authors that become extremely famous thanks to the Latin American boom. Their novels are an instant success, not just in their home countries, but they're actually published in Barcelona. So you've already got some transnational connections with the publishing houses abroad. And then they're all publishing at the same time. And it just happens to, historically speaking, be the moment after the Cuban Revolution has triumphed. So post 1959, we're moving into the 60s, where it is very much a duty of the intellectual to be representative of the left. And so you see how literature is actually commissioned in the case of Cuba. I mean, Fidel Castro actually commissions artists and intellectuals, authors, to think about the revolution in a different way, to critique society in a way that isn't one-sided, that we don't just consider one aspect. We actually take a look at who we are as individuals and how we contribute to the policies and the future of our country. So he is part of this group, and they just happen to be male, a lot of them. And then in the 70s and 80s come the post-boom, which is where we see the authors like Rosario Ferré from Puerto Rico speaking back and saying, hey, wait a minute, we're here too. And we've got big ideas too. And so it's an interesting dynamic with these big names in the beginning, at least, of their fame. Margarita.
Yeah, I'm from Chile. I'm a Chilean woman, so I want to just call to this wonderful group of Latin American writers, Isabella Allende. She's also a woman that uses magical realism. She's also a woman that writes about what happened in my country in the 70s with dictatorship, etc. And she really write about that in different scenarios, romances or etc. So I think, yeah, she's one of the women that represent us as a Latin American women in general.
Yes, and I just realized that I misspoke actually when I was talking about the 2 words. It wasn't Garcia Marquez that wrote that story. It's Isabella Allende. But I don't know why I said that. But Isabella Allende has a lot in common with Garcia Marquez. I think she admires him greatly. So you see a lot of intersections there. So let's see, are there any aspects of this story that you as a reader could relate to as you're going through the Saint? Was there anything that just kind of hit you in a way because of, I mean, this is a more important question perhaps for the second story, which is about confinement. And we might have a lot to say about what we have in common with poor Maria in the second story, but any sentiments that you agree with? Catalina.
Yeah, thanks. I just been thinking a lot about what is being discussed about this story, and yeah, I just think a bit of displacement related to like land and community and family, because Margarita Duarte is it does have the experience of the immigrant, and is the immigrant that takes with him the duty to give back to his community, because he has this mission that is not about him, it's about his community, that he's supposed to canonize his daughter also as a way to fulfill the wishes of his family and his community of like, she's a saint, go and make us known in a way. And a part that really impacted me was when he was sitting like and kind of like obsessively typing, like, I don't know if typing or writing, but all the finances and what he was spending, because he has to go and report back to his community. And so it just makes me think about the story of displacement, because he was living still back in his small town in Tolima. He was not where he was physically. He was not connecting to people. He was not really interacting with people. He didn't belong. But in his mind, he was in another time and in another space. And so in a way, it makes me think about the displacement experience, for instance, in my own personal case, when I first immigrated, and the difficulty to overcome that very noble, how would I say, blurry space, spiritually and emotionally. And for me, Duarte gave me a little bit of compassion, because even 20 years later, was it? Or that the author found him again. And he's like still stuck in that space, still stuck in that mission. And if I may guess, I don't know what Duarte thought, but I don't think he went back to his community because he couldn't fulfill the mission. So he probably didn't want to go back and be a failure. Like, why is he going to go back and he didn't do anything? And it's been 10 years. He probably doesn't know where he belongs anymore, but he's still there in that time capsule. And not moving forward, not moving backwards. It's a little bit saddening in a way. And that's, for me, that was what impacted me the most. Like, the character development of Duarte was amazing. I particularly wasn't a big fan of the story, to be honest. Like, I thought I loved the other story a lot better in terms of structure. I thought he was writing this one more in a style of a novel. It was too overloaded for my taste, and too much of like back and forth. And I know that's his style, usually in novels, but I've seen other stories that he writes very straight to the point in a very magical and exact and very economical way. And I thought, that's interesting. Like, I know this is his style, but not for novels. So it kind of wasn't my favorite, but I thought the character was amazing. And also, the teacher, I forgot his name, Satini, I think. So he was amazing, because in a way he made, because I didn't believe the story. I'm like, yeah, the story is like, if I would have read it, I don't know if I would have known that it's Gabriel García Márquez, I would have thought it's super overloaded, it's recargada, like we would say in Spanish. I don't believe it. But at the same time, as Rebecca was saying, Gabrielle was playing a game with us, like, oh, nobody believes it. Nobody in the story believed it. So it was like, you're not alone. In case you're reading this, they also do not believe it. So I thought that was genius in a way. But it only like came out to me when you guys were talking about it, because I was reading the story and I'm like, I don't believe this. But he kind of like played tricks to make us continue the story. So yeah, that was pretty cool.
Alejandra.
Hi. Yes, one of the things, as Catalina is saying, as immigrants, that he had to go through as an outsider and navigate a system that he didn't know. And I think I have been in that situation a lot of times where I don't know how to navigate the system when it's a new country and you don't know where to go, who to ask, what is the process, you know, what are all the steps need to happen. So I think in that regard, it's probably something similar. And in another regard that I don't, it's not that I don't understand, but it's like the resignation that he has at the end. Like, yes, the saint is still waiting to be canonized, but how long it's gonna take, you know, that. So I don't know if it's a characteristic that Garcia Marquez wants to underline about Latin Americans, like that resignation, you know, that you didn't accomplish the job, you didn't accomplish, then is that long overdue resignation that there's nothing else you can do but just keep waiting for it to happen. And for me, that's very interesting, as well as the character and the how he mentions that he is one of those characters that any author would like to meet, you know, to write about him. And I think that's kind of maybe it's just a little introspection reflecting him as an author, right? So I think that was very interesting, but it's kind of giving you a very personal insight into how he perceives an author, and that an author that is looking for characters. I thought that was very interesting as well.
Thank you. Lily.
Yeah, I was thinking how, while I was reading, especially the saint, the story, how much freedom he has in writing, because it's so imagination based. And so it's really a storyteller in the old sense of a storyteller. I think, like, I can think of you know, a father or a mother telling a story to a kid, and you are just making up as you go. And I just can imagine. And guess what? The Pope had hiccups, you know, and just go on and on. And what did he carry in that box, you know, in those things that you can, wherever the imagination takes you is valid and good, and that you can have fun and let that go anywhere, because there is no limit for where you can go with the story. And I think that this is one of the aspects that I enjoy the most. Like, anything can happen. And I think that that's a quality that we can see in movies too. Like, you know, it can happen because it's a movie. And I like stories where things are happening because it's literature and not because it's so tied to reality, and you have that freedom. And I think he's a master of that, of feeling free, of using his imagination, and almost as, you know, like as a child in a way. I really appreciate that. Thank you.
So you guys have gotten me thinking a little bit. I think the idea of the pilgrimage in this story in particular, and building on what Catalina and Lily are saying, right? There are all of the elements of Garcia Marquez in this story, but a pilgrimage is to go and come back, right? And this is kind of the point of the director. You can't make a movie of just like, what, we're going to prove that the body is weightless and then they're a saint. I mean, you need a desenlace, you need a resolution to the problem. There is no resolution. So what he doesn't, the way that I read this story is, there is no punchline. We are in the limbo with Margarito. We are experiencing what bureaucracy is, right? There is no getting there. So he gives us some characters that we meet along the way. He shows us the steps that we need to take if we do it. He shows us how we report back to you know, where the money is going, but there is no resolution. And it's very uncomfortable for us as readers to get to the end of the story. And first of all, his good friend doesn't even recall And that again goes back to the cinematographic. We need an explosion to remember something. We need a huge character. We need, you know, all of these things to entertain us in a story, right? And he is not any of those things. In fact, when they try and pay for a prostitute for him, he sits her down and tells her the story. You know, it's like he doesn't have any desire to do anything but this immediate task that he has on his mind, right? So it's interesting. And then the story opens with a problem, right? The problem is that his loved ones can no longer rest in peace because a dam is being built. Modernization has arrived to the Andean village where he lives. And as a consequence, his people, the souls of his most loved ones will no longer rest in peace. And so his goal is not only to make her a saint, but to find her final resting place, which just happens to be Italy post World War II. It's the decadence of all decadences. I mean, it's the most run down of grave sites that could possibly exist. And this is what our narrator brings our attention to in the end. Not that she's not a saint yet, not that Margarito is still here. It's, this is disgusting. Look at what Rome is now, and she's here resting. She would have been better where the dam was, you know. It's like, so anyway, it's just this very sad realization that, you know, modernization is wonderful, but it brings wars, it brings dams where they shouldn't belong, it disrupts things. So the bigger message is this one too, right? Do you guys have any other thoughts on this story? Because I am conscious of time, and I know that we do have one more story to discuss. Margarita.
Yeah, just one question that I want to ask you. What do you think is the significance of the lion?
Oh, the lion. I know. I do not know. I was thinking about that. I mean, what do you guys think about the lion? I mean, it's an instinctual animal, right?
Yeah,
I don't know.
thought that, I don't know, somehow Margarito communicates, quotation mark, with the lion in a way that maybe the lion signifies shouting to the world, you know, or his disappointment, maybe, and then the lion, remember that he also appears at the end of the story. The lion is old, of course, after 15 years of Margarito's quest, but the lion is still there. So I don't know, I thought maybe the lion could signify that Margarito's dream is still alive. I don't know, I thought I want to ask because I do not know.
I know, I don't know what to make of the lion. Like, it's one of those things that I was like, oh, this is really important. I should really pay attention to this. Does anyone?
Linda has a good guess there on the chat.
Oh, a prisoner owned by the wealthy. You're right. Yes. A symbol of the encaged and enraged. Wonderful.
Not dissimilar to Margarito, who's trying to display his daughter to anyone that will pay attention.
Yeah. Any final thoughts on our journey toward our next?
Another comment I just thought it was interesting, I think Rebecca reminded me, is you know, this obsession people have had through the ages with relics, religious relics, and canonization and things like that. So when she talked about Canterbury Tales, I think there's some skeezy character, if I'm remembering it correctly, who's trying to sell some bogus relics, and people are spending all their money on, you know, a saint's finger or whatever it was. And that was, when was Canterbury Tales? 1400s? I can't remember. Anyway, skip to this story, which is set whenever it's set, and people still can't get enough.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was Margarita. Go
Yeah.
ahead.
I thought when Alejandra gave her opinion, I thought it was so interesting how different people could see the ending in different ways. She thought it was a little bit of a disappointment because she couldn't, Margarita couldn't, get the canonization. But to me, it was a sign of hope because he's still around. The filmmaker is still around, and he's still there trying to canonize saint. So I thought it's hope because it's still there. So it's so interesting how different people see it differently. That's all.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it is. I think, and I really like the point about the Canterbury Tales. I mean, my husband is a medievalist, so we get a lot of discussions at home about these, but of the Spanish variety. So the Book of Good Love is one of the Spanish texts where you'll see similar types of stories, and I think it's from the 12th century or something like that. I mean, it's there and it's present, and so those are excellent points. Anything else? You guys ready to kind of wrap up this story? I will share my screen again so I can get us going on the next story. But I think one thing that for me, the saint does in traditional Garcia Marquez fashion is juxtaposes different dichotomies. So we have the Andean way, right? The way of Margarito and his cosmovision, his view of the world that is very much framed by his existence in the Andean region of Colombia. He's someone who doesn't have much formal education, but he's described as an intellectual. He's very intelligent. He's taught himself everything that he knows. He not only writes back to the village, but he uses calligraphy, which shows that he's taken the care to learn these formal ways of communicating, and the perception of being an intellectual and the way that we engage with others. And then, another big point that comes up is popular Christianity, what people believe, why pilgrimages exist, why we do certain things, and then institutional Christianity, which is much different and very bureaucratic, right? And not necessarily leading with the human beings that are part of the community in the Vatican area in particular. So these are just a few trends that I think he brings in really well. And so now we'll move on to, I only came to use the phone, which I really like the title of this story. I feel like I've been in a situation like this before in some life. I think we've all been in some, maybe not now because we all have cell phones, but for sure before. I remember being lost in a drugstore or something when I was a kid, and I was like, I just need to call my mom, and they're just like, okay, well, your mom should be here still. And I'm like, no, she's totally left me. Anyway, I had flashbacks, like post-traumatic stress from this story, but I wanted to start a little bit differently this time with the opening paragraph of this story. And just see if we can pick out some of the details that we get from this one paragraph that opens the story. So Garcia Marquez, I'll read it just for the sake of moving the discussion along. One rainy spring afternoon, while Maria de la Luz Cervantes was driving alone back to Barcelona, her rented car broke down in the Monegros desert. She was 27 years old, a thoughtful, pretty Mexican who had enjoyed a certain fame as a music hall performer a few years earlier. She was married to a cabaret magician who she was to meet later that day after visiting some relatives in Zaragoza. For an hour, she made desperate signals to the cars and trucks that sped past her in the storm. until at last the driver of a ramshackle bus took pity on her. He did warn her, however, that he was not going far. So what kind of details do we get out of this first paragraph? Oh, sorry, we're on the wrong slide. Pardon. Can you see it now? Yes, okay, thank you.
All I could think of when I read this first paragraph was like my stomach was lurching as this bus approached. And I'm just like, back up, back up. I don't know if anyone else got that or if I'm just more of a pessimist than I realize.
I definitely did. Did anyone else? I mean, it starts out rainy spring afternoon, and then all of a sudden it's a storm. And so the leveling of the details as we move closer toward the doom that you very intuitively anticipated, Anna, you know, of this bus approaching. And what other things do we learn about her, who she is, in this first paragraph, where she's been, where she's going?
I think in the first paragraph, he gave us a pretty good idea of Maria de la Luz Cervantes as a character, you know, that how old was she? What was she doing before she came into this situation? That she was married and with a magician. That's something that scholars pay attention. I thought he could be, I don't know, a peasant or a teacher or whatever, but he's a magician. So that gotta be used somehow. So I thought he combined so well the explaining the setting and getting the setting to a point of conflict, really, and then telling us quite a bit about the character. Yeah.
Yeah.
And she's also not home, right? She's also an immigrant. And if she hadn't been an immigrant, this couldn't have happened to her because she wouldn't have been so isolated.
Yeah. So we learn a lot about her civil status, her nationality, her profession, what she was doing on this trip to Zaragoza.
Age, sex, appearance.
Exactly. Yeah. So we learn a lot about her right from the beginning. And this is very typical of a Garcia Marquez opening paragraph, right? Just give it all to us. And then we don't need to worry about those details later on. We've got it out in the open. We know what we're dealing with. So I'm going to do the same thing here. I'm going to actually copy and paste some of the questions in the chat. And then I would like to hear your questions as well. So some of the things that I'm bringing in a more core fashion now are, you know, the transnational. We know she's from Mexico, but she's living in Barcelona or Spain. And what is ordinary or extraordinary? We know that he's a magician. What else seems to happen? What relationships drive this story and why are they important? And then what is the importance of space in this story? Space in terms of geography, we can think about it in that way, but also she is in an institution that locks her up. So the idea of being in confinement, what does this do to her as a character? And then could we take this reading to another level, thinking, because the story is published in 1978, it takes place in Barcelona, Spain. There are some references to Franco, or at least the relics, just to use Anna's word, the relics of Franco that are left behind in Catalonia at the time, which is really interesting. So I'll copy these in the chat, but please let's lead with your questions and comments. Anyone like to start?
I found it kind of shocking that this unbelievable thing happens. I mean, perhaps not unbelievable knowing what we know now, but this seemingly unbelievable thing happens. Her husband finally comes to see her And like after speaking to the doctor for 5 minutes or whatever, he's like, nope, seems legit. You should be here. Like,
I know.
I
It's
had the same
crazy.
reaction, and I was like, what? He was supposed to believe her.
Well,
shocking.
yeah, and I mean, I think, you know, that's a good starting point, perhaps, is just talking about him as a character, right? Like, and whether or not we could anticipate that type of, you know, reaction from him. What did you guys think about him?
Not very highly, put it that way. But I mean, I've learned some of this even in Canadian history is, you know, if women, for example, wanted a divorce, even in the 1950s and 60s, husbands could have them committed. Or if they wanted to divorce their wives, which is an unseemly thing, they could have them committed, because then that would leave them free to pursue other options. So, you know, having been raised in later years, maybe I'm not appreciating that this is perhaps not as uncommon as we might believe. And again, this idea of women having agency over their own bodies, over their own lives, which again seems like a foreign concept to the husband, because, you know, she didn't play by the rules. She wasn't like a nice girl. She followed whatever she felt like doing, and, you know, would just kind of pick up and leave when it suited her and come back if it suited her. And she was no man's woman.
Yeah, and I think, you know, the idea that she's a woman and she's doing that is what draws the attention, right? If he did that, there would be no storyline, right? It's the fact that she's the one doing this, and this is a key of her past, you know, the fact that he becomes hysterical and freaks out and paranoid because she seems to have developed a pattern, even if she loves him and has chosen to be with him, and she's desperate to get to his show at 7 p.m. on Monday. In his mind, he's already gone to that dark place of paranoia that she's going to, you know, defeat is not the word. I don't know what word I'm trying, deceive me again.
Yeah, I think it suits him quite well that she can't go anywhere anymore. Like, oh, this is perfect, because when she had freedom, she just kept leaving me. So there's a part of him that is just very relieved. It seems
He
like.
can still visit.
Yeah. He has her right where he wants her.
Like a bird in a cage.
Yeah.
Well, and just the influence of the male figures in this story. The director of the institution has no idea where she's come from, but he has no problem spending 5 minutes with her and deciding her fate for the rest of her existence, right? I mean, it's just unbelievable that after a small conversation and one line, I just came to talk on the phone, or use the phone, that all of a sudden he's able to lock her up in this way, right? And Herculina too. Herculina is another the brute force of the operation, right?
Yeah.
Margarita.
I think Herculina, she's evil. She's really evil. And I think the director of the sanatorium, he's a creepy character, you know, that uses a fake kindness to convince Maria to trust him. And she shares secrets with him, you know, she really trusts him. Yeah. And he was, of course, manipulative.
Yes, very manipulative.
An
interesting point about Herculina, because like we can see her as obviously being an enemy, but at the same time, like she shows what she is right from the get-go. There's no mystery. Whereas the director is the one pretending to be the friend, pretending to really be interested in resolving this problem and getting her to a phone, you know, very soon.
Mm-hmm.
But it's like a total wolf in sheep's clothing.
Yeah.
Both the stories are filled with images and characters and situations that I felt you think they're supposed to be one way, like the popes are supposed to be more concerned with celestial things, and they're not. And the doctor's supposed to protect you. The husband, you marry them in a way because they're supposed to protect you, and yet there's an opposite kind of behavior, or in different circumstances, different kinds of things. So he always plays with those dualities, where you think one thing and it's actually the other. And that's the same, except for I thought of Herculina, I thought of the Pillars of Hercules.
Mhm.
Or something like that, that kind of that brute force, I think, is in a way present in the lion. It's a natural kind of thing that we try and suppress. Like jealousy, same idea. Not that I would give anybody a headlock.
Oh, come on, Jane. We all would. We can all do it.
Do the headlock.
I think especially if we were
Anyway, I
in
love the
confinement.
stories because I just, there was so many dualities. But can I ask a question? I should have asked it earlier. And the other story is filled with ones and twos and zeros. Like they're either one or two. There's all sorts of singles and duals. It's that's what struck me in the first couple of paragraphs, was his use of those things. I don't know if anybody has any thoughts on that, but never mind what you think. I mean, we'll move on. Sorry, it's not that you're not.
No, that's really interesting. I'll have to look back at that. Yeah, I think those are really excellent points. I mean, I think Garcia Marquez does like to put characters up against each other and let them play off of one another in that way to create that effect of duality. And it's also, if you guys have read the Quixote, Don Quixote is where we first see this appearance versus reality, right? Like this idea that, what you see is not always what you get, and it comes through in a very big way for the main character of that book. But here, she almost, like, in a way, she almost doesn't seem shocked that the system is doing this to her. She's almost amused while she's there until she knows there's no way out, right? Until she knows that door is closed, she has the hope, just like Margarito. That's another parallel, but Margarito doesn't lose hope. She kind of is just like, well, whatever, I don't want to see you, and that's that. But it almost seems like, when all the women, when it gets hot, and all the women are, in at mass or whatever, and ripping their clothes off, and this is when she's like, this is my moment. Everybody else has lost their mind, but I'm going to go in and use that phone. And how smart she is to actually use the fact that the woman that runs the show is trying to seduce her, right? And she uses that to her advantage to get what she wants. So she's extremely, sane. She knows exactly what she's doing. She's calculated almost. She knows what she's doing. So she's the exact opposite of how we might define a hysterical female, like that's totally irrational, moving out of her mind, So this is another example, Jane, where it's what you see is, she is what you get in the beginning, and then she just plays the part in a way, right?
Yeah.
Margarita.
There is a scene in the story that I just wrote it down because I thought it was interesting. It wasn't, I think it's Maritime Bar, where Maria kisses a strange adolescent with a long ponytail. And at some point in the narrative, her husband calls her a whore. So that there wasn't really a truly bond of love between them two. That's why at the end he just leave it there and he just marries again. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the Anna, did you want to say something? You look like you want to say something.
I have a lot of thoughts on this topic. It was interesting, yes, because he's a jealous person right from the get-go, and she's left him before, so then that's going to feed the neuroses. But where was I going with that? It's totally fallen into my head. Carry on. Sorry.
But he also, you know, once he realizes again, his cure of his neuroses is when he realizes that he has the upper hand again, right? Like he's in control of her fate now. He realizes that, and that's when he calms down and is like, oh, hey, I'm just gonna reignite my life and leave her there, and this is what we're gonna do. I mean, it's his own little pattern, right? And the fact that he's the magician, she's the assistant, you know, she's his assistant. She accepts this role. She's duty.
So 604 999.
Oh, yeah, and she makes it. She really feels attached to this duty in the beginning. It's her job. She's going to do it. She's going to support him, because without her support, he can't carry out his task, right? So she sees herself in this supporting role in a way, but then at the same time, you know, I think, you know, you're right, Anna, in the beginning, she's an agent. She does whatever she wants, whenever she wants to. And she still does that even when she's locked up in this confined space. She does whatever she wants. She tells the person, no, I'm not going to sleep with you. I'm going to just be here by myself, and I'm just going to carry on about my business and things. So she is an agent in this story for sure, even if she doesn't see herself as such when he is in his professional realm, I guess you could say.
Yeah.
Margarita.
I thought there was an important detail in the setting. You know, the picture or poster or whatever you call it of Franco add to the gloomy ambience of the place. I thought that's a detail that is just telling us something that it's not a happy place. Of course, we know that, and yeah, and it kind of I thought there was just such a different ending to my understanding with the first story, that Margarito Duarte at the end, I thought he still has hope because he's still there in Rome and the filmmaker is there, etc. But at the end here, Maria remains in the asylums and she accepts her life. And on top of that, she got her cat. So that detail of the cat, it sounds to me like she is trying to go back to quotation mark in normal life with her cat there. So to me, that is resignation. I'm here, I'm going to stay here, and that's it. Compared with the previous story that it was more based on the ending of hope, I thought.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, I think that struck me too, that it's like such a hopeless situation. I bet that there are, I'm trying to think of other stories that use the same device, and I bet that there are others, because it's just so like if you are in a mental institution and if you say that you are sane, in a story there will always be someone who will say, yeah, you know, of course, that's what a crazy person would say. And then there is no way out of that, because how are you going to make your point on the point of your sanity if you already lost to the doctor and to the nurse, and so there is no way that you are going to be able to leave this place. So it's in a way it's worse than prison, because it's just this endless loop. So it's a little like a Kafka story, and it also made me think, what is that movie with Jack Nicholson that he is in a mental institution?
Shining?
No.
Who's
that,
Yeah, what?
Clockwork Orange? No. that's
No,
not it.
the one that is in the mental institution, there is a nurse. The-
One flew over the cuckoo's nest.
It is,
Oh, yeah,
yes,
that's the book.
that's the
Ken
one.
Kesey.
Yeah, I could remember the title in Portuguese, but not in English. Yeah, and there is even the nurse who is tough and you know, and then they give you medication because there is that with her too. She is sedated, and then you know, how are you going to fight if you are not even in like you are artificially not in control of your mental capacity. So that's there is where I think that is the political connection, you know, of this hopeless situation that you can feel and know that you are right, but you know, how are you going to convince others or get out of that situation?
Those are really good points. I think going back to the Franco image, I mean, it's something that you don't want to miss in this story in particular, because they're in Barcelona, which did have some support of the Franco regime, as did many places in Spain, right? But in Barcelona and in northern Spain, some of those you know, I remember being in Santander, Spain in the early 2000s, and there was still a cuadro, like a portrait of Franco in a bar on a mountain. I was like, wow, this is mind blowing. It was crazy. But, you know, so that sort of thing happened in the remote areas. You know, this is a bus that picks her up on the side of the road and she's in the middle of nowhere, right? So you get the feeling too that she's removed from the urban centers of Spain at this time. And then the institutions were very much controlled by the dictatorship, right? The institutions belong to the whole system. And so one of the things, and I know we're short on time, but I put a couple of books in the chat because Michel Foucault, a French theorist, talks a little bit about this relationship between the powers that be in society and the different institutions. I mean, it doesn't have to be the manicomio or the institution, the mental institution, but schools, you know, how schools form us and shape us and get us to think in a certain way, teach us the language to use to describe certain things. All of these institutions, when you're in a repressive regime, employ the same discourse, and in creating the words that then lead to the relationships of power, determine the relationships of power, we all become what we are tagged as, right? So the moment that she realizes that she cannot by her own will escape, she assumes what society says that she is, which is a crazy woman, right? So she assumes this label and begins to act as such, right? So those two books read together explain how institutions work and then how language works to explain relationships of power. And the interesting thing is we often think that power is something that we can hold and we can possess. But what Foucault says is that's not the case at all. We're all part of this relationship of power. So in realizing that she's a woman in a patriarchal society and deciding that in a dictatorship, a Catholic dictatorship that privileges marriage over, you know, relationships with here and there and everywhere and everyone, she chooses to be a free spirit and to do what she wants and to be with who she wants and to go with that black-haired ponytail guy and to see him on the side and do her things, right? So she chooses these things, but in the moment that she's institutionalized, she is then, she has to succumb to the discourse that defines her, right? So it's interesting to think about that.
That was a good way of like taming or holding women in their position, or saying like if you have relationships outside of marriage, or if you have sexual desire or whatever, then you are a crazy person. You are Yeah.
you're hysterical. You know, the
Hysterical,
term comes
yeah.
from Freud. I think it's Freud's 1896 article, Etiology and Hysteria. I have it right in front of me. I was brushing up, you know, before the but the guy in this, the interesting thing is, like, going back to some of the points that Anna raised, the guy is the hysterical one in this. He's the irrational one. He's the one that acts on impulse. He's the one that can't cope with being on his own. So Garcia Marquez flips the narrative a bit in this story. Even though she's locked up, the guy is locked up in his own head, right? Anna.
How many of you, when you're reading this, started to wonder if you're being gaslit by the storyteller? Because like there's the misogyny aspect of this, of course. And it's like she was only going there to use the phone. Her husband, who's been married to her for a couple of years, like, just takes this other guy's word for it. Like, was she broken down on the side of the road? Was she always meant to be there? Who can know? And then you're like, wait, I thought we were supposed to believe the woman. I don't know. It's confusing. And I don't know if that's meant to be, but it was one of those moments where you find yourself wondering if you have a reliable narrator.
Well, and the detail that years down the road, the institution is in shambles. It no longer exists, right? It's totally destroyed. So you start to think, like, maybe Maria, got what was she, maybe she got even, maybe she, I don't know. But it's true, yeah. There were a few too many coincidences there to fall into, right? The narrator is not always reliable.
Something that I couldn't tell whether it was real or not was whether the bus driver and the woman on the bus were, like, kidnapping her intentionally, or whether they genuinely thought that she would be able to get help there, because that seemed very naive of them to think that they could drop her off here and that she wouldn't have been mistaken for a patient. So I struggled with that plot element so much, and I was like, no, like, they actually stole her. Like, they were going to get money for her or something like that. I thought that was not clear, what their role really was.
I'm sorry, I have to annoy you all. It seems like the conversation is going great, and honestly, it's just like a great story, and I wish we could keep on going, but we have to wrap up. Sorry. So we're getting to the end of tonight's session, and thanks, Brianne, for sharing with us these amazing stories, and for fostering this space to think critically and to share. Thanks for sharing your expertise with us tonight. So yeah, over to you, Lily, for anything else you would like to add.
Brianne, I wanted to give you a moment if there is any wrapping up that you would like to do.
No, thank you.
Yeah?
You all
Okay.
did such a wonderful job. I really enjoyed the format this time, with just letting you all lead with your questions. And Rebecca, I'm there with you with the struggles in Garcia Marquez's plots. I think he does that to us on purpose. And thank you all so much. This is such a treat for me, because you're also participative, which isn't always the case in some of the classes that I teach. So I'm very appreciative of this opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Brianne. Thank you for us accepting our invitations once more. I have a couple of things to say before we leave. One is that we have recorded this session, and so if you want to see again it will be on our YouTube channel in a few days. The next reading group will happen on February 8th. Registration is open soon, so we are going to get our newsletter with invitation or you can just go to VLACC.ca and take a look, but it will be up on our website soon. The next reading group, February 8th, with Professor Alessandra Santos, and Alessandra is going to be a special edition for Black History Month. So let's see what Alessandra is going to come up for this one. I would like to also remember you all that if you'd like to keep events like this available to all, please consider donating any amount. And I also would like to ask for a favor. we prepared a 2-minute survey. We have changed the time of this event. It used to be at 7, and we are trying this 6 p.m. to 7:30. So I'd like to know your opinion on that, or any other comments that you have about this format, because we are always trying to tweak it to adapt for whatever you like. So that's it for tonight. Thank you again, Brianne. Thank you all for taking time to be with us tonight. Catalina, thank you for helping us out with all this and for the coordination. I'm going to turn off my camera, and so feel free to go, but I'm going to keep the event open for just a few more minutes if you want to click on any of the links.
Thanks, everybody. Nice to see you again.
Thank you. Thank you all.